2023 was highlighted by its big releases. 3D Zelda returned after a 6-year wait, with the sequel to Breath of the Wild no less. We saw the first new 2D Mario game of a generation in which I wasn't sure we were going to get one. Other long-dormant franchises were successfully revived, and several smaller titles proved that they could compete with the big names. I too echo the sentiment I've heard non-stop about 2023. It's the best year of video games I can remember. Almost every single one of my favorite franchises got new entries this year, and when I look at the list of games to release during the last 12 months, I'm dumbfounded by the sheer amount of quality titles. Today, I want to reflect on my 6 favorite games from a pretty special year, and at the end, pick a top 3 and overall Game of the Year for 2023. In chronological order by release date, let's start by talking about the first game, which is Metroid Prime Remastered. Yes, I'm counting a remaster in my Game of the Year list. Is it a game? Did it release this year? Then it counts for Game of the Year in my book. I appreciate brand new games that bring fresh new ideas as much as anyone else, but a remake or remaster can be just as important to someone's year in gaming. In the cases when this happens, it's my opinion that you include it. If I had to pick a top moment of the year, Metroid Prime Remastered's reveal and same-day release during the February Nintendo Direct would certainly be a contender. A lot of the time I'll describe something as leaving me speechless, and in most cases there's a bit of exaggeration going on there, but this was one of the times when I actually had no words. First of all, it looked so good. Like, hard to believe this was a GameCube game good. Next, like many who grew up in this era, the original is one of my favorite games of all time. Full stop, I consider it a masterpiece. So there's no world where I wouldn't drop everything to play the remaster. To be honest, a simple up-res port of Metroid Prime to Switch would have been fine with me. But throughout my time with it, I was constantly amazed at how much this remaster goes above and beyond expectations. All the assets have been beautifully touched up, and the controls have been thoughtfully preserved and expanded upon. Depending on your preference, you can make it feel like the original single-stick controls, adopt the slick new dual analog style with gyro aiming for precise adjustments, or go for full-on motion control for those like me who've grown accustomed to the pointer aiming of the Nintendo Wii re-release. In such a strong gaming year, it seems only natural that we'd see a new standard set when it comes to video game remasters. Metroid Prime Remastered was one of 2023's biggest and most pleasant surprises. Here's hoping we see something else from the Prime series in 2024. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. Yes, I'm putting a remaster and now a DLC on my Game of the Year list, but I'm including the DLC for the same reason I'm including that remaster. In my opinion, if it's important to your year in gaming, then you need to honor that. But to be honest, in the case of Future Redeemed, you could definitely get away with calling it a brand new game. Sure, it's tied to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, but it's also a standalone 20+ hour RPG in its own right. It follows a completely new protagonist, Matthew, who during the main story helps the party rebel against an all-powerful force, a choice which sets the events of base game Xenoblade Chronicles 3 into motion. Does the story carry Future Redeemed? Maybe a little bit. But even still, the battle system here might be what I consider the peak of action RPG combat, featuring some smart changes from the base game and tough fights and super bosses that will no doubt test your skills. The massive, lush environments that the Xenoblade series is known for are here in full effect, all teeming with secrets to find and fearsome enemies to conquer. Plus, it doesn't hurt that many of Future Redeemed's locations are nostalgia-fueled callbacks to important locations from previous games in the series. Just like Torn of the Golden Country before it, this is a powerful prequel, and easily one of the best DLCs ever made. In a note to fans, series executive director Tetsuya Takahashi mentions how Xenoblade Chronicles 3 serves as a culmination of the current arc of the saga. And knowing this, while watching that ending credit sequence play out, I have to admit, it's the hardest I've ever cried from a video game. I know that's embarrassing and it's all a little bit bit silly, but completing Future Redeemed is one of my core gaming memories from 2023, and to this day I go back to those cutscenes if I'm trying to get in my feelings. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed is an expansion I won't soon forget, and is without a doubt one of the standout RPGs during a very strong year for the genre. It serves as the perfect bookend for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and a love letter to fans of the series thus far. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Like most people, I was pretty excited for Tears of the Kingdom. Zelda has been my favorite franchise since I was a little kid, and the newest game in the series was going to be a direct sequel to my favorite Zelda game ever. All of this was music to my ears when the project was first revealed back in 2019. Ever since then, I'd been ravenous for any bits of news I could find about the game. I needed to know how they could possibly follow up Breath of the Wild. Talk about a tall order. And it was a very real possibility that Tears of the Kingdom could have come out after a 6-year wait and fallen flat, not living up to the hype. I should have been more nervous about it, but honestly, for some reason, I wasn't. Throughout the entire wait, I had this calm confidence that the Zelda team was going to deliver. I mean, they always do, why should I think otherwise? And now, after a few months with the game, I'm happy to say I was right. What they achieved with Tears of the Kingdom is nothing short of incredible. I still remember that mind-blowing Aonuma gameplay demonstration before the game came out, where he showed off several of the game's new abilities like Ultra Hand, Fuse, and Ascend. So we can create working machines by sticking together objects in any orientation we can imagine. And if that wasn't enough, we can augment any of the game's weapons with hundreds of items found across the world, each having a unique effect. And oh yeah, remember how vertical travel was slow in Breath of the Wild? Well, in this one, if you have any sort of cliff face above you, you can just warp up there in a couple of seconds. It works anywhere on the map too, indoors and outdoors, not a big deal. I can't think of a more ambitious video game project than this, and the fact they pulled it off with no major bugs or glitches is bar none the most impressive feat I've seen in my time following this industry. There's now a new gold standard in the genre, and it's all wrapped up in a beautiful, fascinating open world. This is the Hyrule Breath of the Wild players will be familiar with, but completely redesigned. And if you didn't already know by now, the scope of the world map is effectively tripled this time around, with the addition of the Sky Islands above and a full second map, the depths below the surface. I'm already nearing the end of my allotted time for this segment, and all I've really done is rattle off ridiculous stats about Zelda, but that's the kind of game this is. It's a once-in-a-generation masterwork from the best development team in the business, and this year, they've flexed their muscles yet again. Pikmin 4. Pikmin 4 could have been the worst game to come out this year and I still would have been happy with it. Putting any sort of critical eye aside, the Pikmin series is just plain sentimental for me. It's a game series I really gravitated toward as a kid, and that enthusiasm never really left. My whole life I've theory crafted about the series, drawing out new Pikmin types and game mechanics, and hardly a year would go by where I didn't revisit one of the earlier titles. It's why, ever since I started following video game announcements, that I'd be there predicting Pikmin 4 at every E3 or Nintendo Direct, getting nothing in return. Of course, fears would creep in that Nintendo was done with the series after the Wii U, even though I knew deep down these fears were unfounded. That's why it was such a powerful moment last year when I finally saw this. And eventually learned that Pikmin 4 would release in the summer of 2023. It still doesn't even seem real. But now that I'm on the other side, having played the game to max completion, it's starting to settle in a little bit. Pikmin 4 is legitimately amazing, forging an identity all its own. It doesn't have the pressure of Pikmin 1's 30-day time limit. It doesn't have the unforgiving difficulty of Pikmin 2, and there's not as much of a set path as there is in Pikmin 3. Instead, Pikmin 4 excels as a fresh take on the formula, yet it doesn't lose its heart and soul as a Pikmin game. You can feel the threads of all 3 previous entries running through it, and as a lifelong Pikmin superfan, that's something I'm thrilled to say. For the first time in the series, Pikmin 4 allows the player to create their own avatar, which serves as the main character for the adventure, and the newly added pup companion, Ochi, adds a brand new layer of traversal capabilities, all while serving as, essentially, a second captain, so as to not lose that single-player puzzle co-op feel that Pikmin 2 and 3 were built on. Subterranean caves return from Pikmin 2, which adds incredible depth to the world, and this time around, planet PNF 404 is absolutely packed with collectible treasures, blowing away the treasure totals of any previous entry in the series. This makes 4 the most sizable Pikmin adventure to date. It also doesn't hurt that the game is visually stunning, easily one of the best looking games on the hardware. Pikmin 4 features big, beautiful environments filled with dangerous alien wildlife, and intricate sound design that's simply a joy to behold. It was a long wait for the Pikmin faithful, but the final product was more than worth it. Pikmin 4 deserves all the praise and accolades it's gotten so far, and all the Pikmin fans deserve it too. Sea of Stars. Not to sound like a snob, but it's rare that a non-Nintendo release commands my attention from the moment it's revealed. But Sea of Stars did, and it's no mystery as to why. For one thing, its pixel art is absolutely stunning. This is also the game that kept hyping up how Yasunori Mitsuda had a role in their sound team, a move that I think really paid off and helped establish some ethos in the JRPG space. Sea of Stars was created by Western developer Sabotage Studios, makers of The Messenger, a game which I really loved, but belonged to a vastly different genre. Did this mean I was going to love a turn-based RPG from them too? It was hard to tell if Sea of Stars was going to have the substance. And during the game's opening hours, I wasn't sold. It has a bit of a slow start, and the ridiculous next Chrono Trigger comparisons I was hearing online weren't helping. I was ready to accept Sea of Stars as fine on the surface level, but overhyped. A game I'd see through to the end, but sort of begrudgingly. Over the course of the adventure though, something changed. New party members added more depth to the combat, unlockable tools were leading to better overworld puzzles, the characters became endearing, and the narrative started to pick up steam. By the time I reached the ending, I didn't want it to stop. In an unprecedented move, I ended up going for max completion and the true ending, for no reason other than that the game was awesome and I wanted to keep playing it. Now, having seen all that Sea of Stars has to offer, I can say that despite taking heavy inspiration from classic RPGs of yesteryear, it absolutely stands on its own merits too. Timed action commands make their way over from Super Mario RPG. We have combo attacks reminiscent of techs from Chrono Trigger. We even see things from more modern classics, like an elemental lock system reminiscent of Octopath Traveler, and overworld puzzles that made me feel like I was using Synergy in Golden Sun. Speaking of Golden Sun, it's actually the game Sea of Stars reminds me of most, due to its general vibe and aesthetic, character designs, and humorous, endearing writing. At the end of the day, what I really think helped Sea of Stars reach the popularity it has is just how beautiful it is. The art is pure eye candy, and not a week goes by where I don't spin at least one of the tracks from this OST. As a fan of Sabotage's previous work, I'm so relieved that Sea of Stars turned from a game I thought was completely overrated to one of my standout titles in the toughest Game of the Year competition I've done thus far. Super Mario Bros. Wonder. I don't know how I've gotten this far into the video without mentioning a Mario game. The plumber had one of his biggest years on record, delivering 2 knockout punches in the form of a Super Mario RPG remake and his first original 2D side-scroller in nearly a decade. The latter, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, is a triumph. It's the king of a genre reclaiming his throne with one of the most charming, thrilling, and innovative titles of the year. I was completely completely obsessed with Super Mario Bros. Wonder during the end of 2023. It's a think about it even when you're not playing it type game. One of many games like that this year, to the detriment of my productivity. It's an example of expert craftsmanship. A game that comes off as so elegantly simple, as we see no remnants of the grueling work that it took to create something that's so approachable yet completely satisfying. A game that's accessible for pretty much anyone, regardless of skill level, yet complex enough for hardcore players to enjoy as well. I was so happy to take in each level, thrilled to see what out-of-this-world wonder effect I'd find next, and by the end I was in full tryhard mode, trying to 100% the special world. One of my highlights of the year was completing that final test after several arduous hours of failure. Wonder is a perfect balance of tradition meets innovation for one of gaming's most iconic series. Not all that much has changed from past games. All things considered, it feels pretty similar to the 2D Mario games of old, and I think that's so important. As a series, 2D Mario sits on a fine line, and while innovation is key for new titles, too much change would blur its identity. With Wonder, I'm so impressed at how new changes like wonder effects and badges augment the traditional style gameplay just the right amount. And on top of that, it's all customizable, so if you're turned off by the idea of badges and want a more traditional experience, it's your choice. Personally, I loved experimenting with all the badges, but I understand wanting a more pure experience too. Even on a badgeless run, discovering all the new wonder effects is still an absolute blast. While the art direction and level design is clearly brilliant, I still realize Wonder has some flaws. Like many others, I wasn't as thrilled with the game's bosses. I feel like maybe they should have graduated beyond jump on their head 3 times to defeat them. Fights took great advantage of wonder effects, which made for some really unique scenarios, but I don't think it was quite enough. Methods for defeating each boss remained pretty much consistent with what we'd seen in the past. It could have been interesting if they forced certain badges during fights to make them all just a bit more engaging, but this is all easy for me to say and extremely hard to execute properly. All in all, Super Mario Bros. Wonder was an irreplaceable part of my year, and I hope the game's success convinces Nintendo to greenlight the production of another 2D Mario right away. While I want them to take their time and make another fantastic adventure just like this one, I also hope that we won't have to wait quite as long for the next game. Now that I've talked about each game in my top 6, it's time to pick out the top 3 and then my overall game of the year. While last year I was constantly going back and forth on my top 3 and eventual winner, this year, despite some stiff competition, it was actually pretty easy narrowing it down. I'm confident about how I've ranked these games and I'm happy with the end result. For my number 3 spot, I have to give it to Metroid Prime Remastered. If I could go back and relive that day of the Nintendo Direct when it shadow dropped, I would in a heartbeat. I remember instantly downloading it from the eShop, heart pounding, running on pure adrenaline. Then I spent the rest of the week in bliss revisiting a jaw-dropping new version of one of the best games ever made. If you've never played Metroid Prime before, I implore you to pick up the Switch Remaster, even if you aren't a fan of first-person games. I'm telling you, it's a 10 out of 10, and a big part of what made 2023 special. A game I'll surely play countless more times in the future. Moving on to the number 2 spot in my runner-up for Game of the Year this year, it's Pikmin 4. I think in pretty much any other year, Pikmin 4 gets my Game of the Year. I don't think I've ever devoured a game as quickly and thoroughly as I did this one. It was all I could think about for the better part of a month, and that's because of just how fantastic it is. Is it my favorite game in the Pikmin series? I'm not so sure. It's still kind of early to say. But what I will say is that it's the perfect blend of comforting, addicting, and challenging, and I simply couldn't pull myself away until it was all done. Sure, it helps that I'm a massive fan of the series, but I'd wholeheartedly recommend Pikmin 4 to anyone that's even remotely interested. No matter where your gaming interests lie, I think you'll find something to love about Pikmin 4, and if you've skipped it thus far, I think you should change that. As I look back at the year 2023, I'll always think of it as the year Pikmin 4 came out, and I don't think that will ever fail to put a smile on my face. But as you might have guessed, my overall Game of the Year for 2023 is The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And yeah, I know, me and just about everyone else, but it is what it is for a reason. There was really no other answer this year. It's the best game to come out by a mile, and pretty much every major games outlet agrees. Zelda was on everyone's minds this year, and there's a good reason its influence spread so wide. It's that good. It's a landmark game that will influence countless others to follow. Another legendary title on Nintendo's belt that will now be the benchmark they push themselves to exceed, and one that inspires other game developers to be bold and push the medium forward too. Full disclosure, I haven't even finished it yet. I usually have a rule that I have to finish games before putting them on a Game of the Year list, but Tears of the Kingdom is an exception. I could have easily gone and fought Ganon before making this video, but I decided not to rush it. Quite frankly, I don't want it to be over, and I want to finish up everything I can before I experience the conclusion and roll credits. I'm excited to continue this journey well into 2024, taking my time to soak up all this game has to offer. I'm sure we have a pretty long wait ahead of us before the next Zelda game anyways. And there you have it, another Game of the Year video in the books, and I have to say this was probably my favorite one to make thus far. If you've made it to this point in the video, then I really want to thank you for sticking it out with me and supporting the channel this year. I really appreciate each and every one who checks out the videos, and I'm thankful to be able to express my enthusiasm for Nintendo games, especially during a year like this. Once again, thanks for being here and sharing with me what I thought was a pretty fantastic year for Nintendo in 2023. We're off toward big things in 2024 with potentially a new console around the corner, and I'm so grateful you're all here with me along for the ride. Thanks as always for watching.